The rain had been falling since before dawn, fine and steady, like static against the broken windows of what had once been the Halcyon Grand. Chicago's skyline was half hidden behind the mist, its lights blurred and distant. The building stood alone on the corner of Wacker and Franklin, fenced off by rusted metal and warning tape, its marble facade blackened by smoke. The fire had been put out years ago, but the air still carried the faint smell of burnt carpet and wet plaster. Detective Miller ducked under the barrier, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. He'd walked this street hundreds of times during his years on the force, but he had never stepped inside the Halcyon until that morning. The city had ordered another demolition, and Miller's job was simply to confirm the site was clear. Yet as he moved through the ruined lobby, boots echoing over water-stained tiles, he felt as if the building were watching him. "Don't be dramatic," he muttered, voice muffled by his mask. The beam of light crossed the reception desk. The wood was cracked and bloated from years of rain, but the brass bell still gleamed faintly under the grime. He brushed a finger across its surface and against every instinct tapped it once. The faint ding rolled through the empty space like a whisper. Somewhere deeper in the darkness, something answered. Not a voice, not a movement, just a low electrical hum, as if a generator hidden beneath the floor had woken for the first time in a decade. The flashlight flickered. Miller raised it toward the grand staircase. There, between the rails, lay a single room key untouched by dust. He bent to pick it up. The tag read room 3404. The air grew colder. He could see his breath bloom white in the beam of his light. And when he turned toward the cracked mirror behind the front desk, the reflection wasn't his own. It was a woman standing in the same spot, her eyes wide, her mouth open as if mid-scream. The light faltered again and the reflection was gone. Miller dropped the key. It clattered to the tile. Somewhere far above, deep in the dark shafts of the upper floors, a faint metallic ding answered. The sound of an elevator arriving. Chicago never truly slept, but on nights like this it looked exhausted. The wind came in off the river carrying mist and cold, bending the streetlights into long golden streaks across the wet pavement. A taxi turned onto Wacker Drive and stopped in front of the Halcyon Grand, its wipers squeaking against the glass. Mara Lane stepped out first. The rain caught her brown hair and pressed it against her cheeks as she paid the driver and pulled her suitcase from the trunk. She looked up at the tower, 50 stories of glass and stone that vanished into fog. The revolving doors spun lazily, and inside, light spilled from chandeliers like liquid gold. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had booked the room on impulse after missing a flight and a fight with her sister that left her shaking. The Halcyon was expensive, far more than she could afford, but it felt safe in the photos. Bright, sterile, anonymous. Somewhere to disappear for a night. Inside, the lobby smelled of lilies and furniture polish, Jazz murmured from hidden speakers. The marble floor shone so perfectly she could see her reflection in it, slightly distorted. Behind the reception desk stood a man in a tailored black suit, Adrian. His name tag said, his smile practiced but polite, "Good evening. Ms. Lane, welcome to the Halcyon Grand." His tone was too even, too rehearsed, but Mara nodded anyway. Reservation under Lane, one night. Of course. He slid a brass key card across the desk. 34th floor, city view. Elevators to your left. As she took the card, she noticed his hands were unusually pale, the nails perfectly trimmed, the fingers motionless, even as he smiled. For a moment, she thought she saw static flicker across the glass behind him, as though the lobby lights were about to dim, but they held steady. She crossed the lobby, heels tapping against marble, and stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close, then stopped as another guest hurried inside. A tall man with rain on his coat and a briefcase clutched tight. "Sorry," he said, breathless. "Didn't want to wait for the next one." "Power's been acting weird." Mara pressed the button for 34. The man hit 36, the elevator hummed upward. Soft music slightly warped as though underwater. "I'm Elliot," he offered after a moment. "Mara, here for business?" "Just passing through." He nodded, eyes on the floor numbers. "Lucky you." When she glanced at him again, his reflection in the polished steel wall seemed a fraction out of sync, lagging behind by half a heartbeat. She blinked hard, and it matched again. The elevator stopped on 34. She stepped out into a hallway that stretched long and empty, lined with abstract paintings that all seemed to use the same dull red streak somewhere near the center. The carpet muffled her steps. At the far end, an exit sign buzzed faintly, the only imperfection in the silence. Her room smelled faintly of ozone and lemon cleaner. She set her suitcase by the bed, pulled the curtains wide, and looked out. Chicago glittered below, reflections rippling across the river. For a moment, she felt almost calm. Then, in one of the mirrored windows of the building opposite, she saw movement, a figure standing in a window on her own floor, watching. She leaned closer, but when she blinked, it was gone. Downstairs, more guests arrived. Riley and Jenna, newlyweds from Milwaukee, laughing too loudly as they wheeled their luggage across the lobby. Their joy felt fragile, like glass under pressure. Mrs. Collins, an older woman in a beige coat, clutched a paper bag against her chest. She moved slowly, eyes darting as if following something unseen. A young man named Noah, an artist with paint on his sleeves, took a seat near the fireplace, sketchbook open but untouched. Adrian, the concierge, greeted each of them with the same serene smile, the same steady tone. To anyone watching, it might have seemed perfectly normal, a luxury hotel in the heart of the city. But every so often, the chandelier overhead flickered just once like a pulse. Upstairs, Mara lay awake listening to the city. The room felt too quiet, insulated, as though the walls were thicker than they should be. When she finally drifted toward sleep, she heard something soft. 3 slow knocks on the wall behind the headboard. She waited, heart pounding. Nothing followed. Just as she began to relax, a whisper came through the air vent, faint and distant. "Don't leave when the lights go out." Her eyes snapped open. Morning came gray and heavy. The rain had turned to sleet that hissed softly against the windows, and Chicago looked like a photograph, colorless, motionless, blurred by frost. Mara woke late, uneasy from dreams she couldn't quite remember. For a few seconds, she thought she'd dreamt of running through hallways lined with mirrors. Her own face multiplied and distorted, every reflection whispering her name. When she blinked, the dream broke apart like glass. She showered, dressed, and stepped into the corridor. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if the vents were exhaling cold iron. The lights overhead buzzed, then steadied. On her way to the elevator, she noticed something strange. Every door on her floor was open a fraction, just enough to show a sliver of darkness within. No sound came from any of them. The elevator arrived already half full. Inside stood Elliot, the businessman from the night before. Riley and Jenna still laughing softly about something private. And a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, confident, wearing a red scarf that looked too bright against the gray morning. The plaque on her lapel read Dr. Patel, guest lecturer. "Morning," Riley offered. "Morning," Mara answered, pressing L for the lobby. The doors closed with a soft sigh. The music that played, some gentle piano loop, stuttered mid-note, then resumed in a lower key. They all noticed. No one said anything. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, the silence felt heavy enough to touch. The lobby was busier than the night before. Guests milled around the concierge desk complaining about the spotty Wi-Fi, the flickering lights, the heating system. Adrian stood behind the counter, calm as ever, hands folded neatly. "I assure you," he said, "our technicians are working on it. It's only temporary." His voice was smooth enough to almost believe, but something about his eyes unsettled Mara. They looked like the color of old photographs, brown faded toward gray. She ordered coffee from the cafe in the corner and took a seat near the windows. Outside, traffic crawled along Wacker Drive, tires hissing through slush. For a moment, the ordinary noise of the city grounded her. Then she saw Noah, the young artist, sitting a few tables away, staring at the sketchbook in front of him. From where she sat, she could see that every page was filled with the same drawing, the chandelier over and over, each version darker, more distorted, until the crystals looked like teeth. "Rough morning?" she asked. He looked up sharply, startled, then forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd draw it out of my system." "Draw what?" "The hum," he said softly, tapping the page. "You don't hear it yet?" Before she could ask, the lights above them flickered again. This time they dimmed long enough for people to gasp. When they brightened, Adrian was standing beside the front desk phone, receiver pressed to his ear. Yes, he said quietly. Yes, I understand. Then he hung up and turned to the guests. Nothing to worry about. A grid malfunction. It will be resolved soon. But outside the windows, the traffic lights had gone dark. The city beyond the glass seemed to hold its breath. By evening, the mood had changed. The bar filled quickly with people trying to make the best of the outage rumors. Candles burned on every table, their flames reflected in the black marble surfaces like tiny, nervous eyes. Mara sat with Elliot and the newlyweds. The doctor in the red scarf joined them later, ordering whiskey neat. Storm on the grid, she said. Transformer fires on the south side. Whole downtown could go dark if the wind keeps up, Riley chuckled. Well, if it does, we've got candles and company. Company, Elliot repeated, staring into his glass. Sure. He'd been quiet all evening, glancing at the lobby clock every few minutes. Mara finally asked, You waiting for someone? He hesitated, then shook his head. No, juste déjà vu. I stayed here years ago. Place had a different name then. The Halcyon Towers, I think. Mrs. Collins, sitting at the far end of the bar, looked up sharply. No one stayed here since the fire. Everyone turned to her. Her voice was calm, but her eyes glistened in the candlelight. What fire? Mara asked. The old woman's hands trembled. They rebuilt, she said simply. But the foundation's still the same. She pushed back her stool and left without another word. No one spoke for a while after that. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the river. Around 11, Mara took the elevator back to her floor. The hallway lights flickered as she stepped out, but she barely noticed. She was thinking about the old woman's words. The foundation's still the same. What did that mean? She slid her keycard, entered her room, and froze. The window curtains were drawn even though she'd left them open. Her suitcase sat on the bed unzipped. Inside, her clothes were neatly folded, but on top of them lay a single piece of paper torn from Noah's sketchbook. It showed the chandelier again, but this time hanging upside down, every crystal streaked with something dark. A faint hum filled the air, low and steady, like the sound of distant machinery. She pressed her palms over her ears, but it came from inside her head. Then the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the room, absolute and soundless. For a long moment she stood frozen, breathing shallowly. Somewhere down the corridor a door slammed, followed by hurried footsteps, then a man's voice shouting, "It's happening again!" The hum deepened. The window glass vibrated softly, and the city outside vanished into pitch black. The only light came from the emergency exit sign over the door, bleeding red into the dark. She grabbed her phone. No signal. The clock on the bedside table flickered to 12:07 a.m. before dying completely. The air conditioning stopped. In the silence that followed, she could hear faint whispers, dozens of them, just at the edge of hearing. They weren't words, more like a tide rising and falling inside the walls. Mara stumbled into the hallway. Doors were opening up and down the corridor. Other guests peeked out, faces pale in the crimson glow. Riley and Jenna emerged hand in hand. Elliot came running from the opposite end, flashlight beams shaking. "The elevators are dead," he said. "Phones too. Everything's..." He stopped. From the stairwell came a metallic clatter, like something heavy falling. Then silence. "Generator?" Jenna whispered. Elliot shook his head. "No, that came from upstairs." They looked at one another, unsure whether to run or wait. The hum returned, louder now, pulsing through the floor beneath their feet. Then, as if obeying an unseen cue, the exit lights along the corridor flickered once and went out. The hotel exhaled into total blackness. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The corridor lay swallowed in red darkness. Even the hum of the air vents had died. All that remained was the thin sound of breathing, the kind people make when they're trying not to be heard. Mara's heartbeat filled her ears. She could taste metal on her tongue, the taste of fear. Riley fumbled for the flashlight on his phone, but when he pressed the button, nothing happened. The screen stayed black. Elliot's beam, the only point of light, trembled across the carpet and caught the edges of the paintings on the walls. Every frame showed a different shape now, no longer abstract splashes of red and gray, but blurred human faces as if painted in haste. "Maybe it's just a surge," Jenna whispered. "Nothing surges this long," Elliot muttered. A distant crash echoed through the floors above them, heavy and final. They all flinched. "The generator's downstairs," Elliot said. If we can find the stairs, we might. Mara shook her head. You tried the elevators earlier. What about emergency exits? I checked, he said quietly. Locked. Every one of them. They stood there listening. Somewhere down the hallway, a soft tick-tick-tick started, like a clock winding backward. Riley aimed the flashlight toward the sound and took a hesitant step. The beam caught a small brass service bell lying on the floor. It rang once by itself. They gathered in the lobby 30 minutes later, at least 20 guests, pale and restless, wrapped in the thin glow of emergency candles. The grand chandelier above them had gone dark, its crystals swaying slightly as if stirred by unseen wind. Adrian, the concierge, stood behind the reception desk, still wearing that perfect smile. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're experiencing a temporary power failure. Our staff are resolving the issue. Please remain calm. Where's the staff? A man near the front demanded. There's no one here but you. Adrian's eyes flicked toward the stairwell door. They're working below. Mara didn't believe him. She moved closer to Elliot, lowering her voice. Something's wrong with him. He doesn't blink. Elliot glanced sideways. She was right. Adrian's gaze never shifted, his pupils reflecting the candlelight like glass. Jenna clutched Riley's arm. I'm calling 911, she said, though the words were more hope than plan. Her phone displayed no service. Around them, others tried too, staring at blank screens. The only signal that came through was a single notification that flashed and vanished before anyone could read it. Some swore it said stay indoors. Others thought it was a glitch. Then faint at first, a voice crackled through the lobby speakers. Half static, half whisper. Guests, remain where you are. Assistance on the way. The speakers went silent. Adrian's smile widened just a fraction. You see? Nothing to worry about. Outside the revolving doors, the city had disappeared. From within the lobby, they could see only blackness where Chicago's lights should have been. The streets swallowed by fog thick enough to look solid. Yet every few seconds, flashes of white passed through it. Headlights, lightning, no one could tell. Noah, the young artist, pressed his face to the glass. There's something out there, he whispered. It's moving between the cars. Probably police, someone said. Noah shook his head slowly. Too tall. Mara didn't want to look, but did. The fog shifted. Something long and thin glided past, vanishing the instant the candlelight flickered. Adrian clapped his hands once. Everyone, the restaurant still has gas burners. We'll serve coffee and food while we wait. It will help keep you warm. He spoke like a man reading from a script. When he walked toward the kitchen doors, the guests followed, eager for light, noise, anything that wasn't silence. The restaurant was colder than the lobby. The candles on each table burned with low blue flames that bent toward the ceiling. Plates of food sat waiting, steaming bowls of soup untouched as if prepared minutes before the blackout. The smell should have been comforting, but it was wrong somehow, too sweet, too thick. Elliot reached for a bowl, then froze. This is still hot. Generators? Mara asked. There aren't any, he said. Riley forced a laugh. Come on, man, it's a hotel, he stopped. On the far side of the room, a door creaked open, and for a split second, the light from the candle stretched farther than it should have, spilling down a corridor that didn't exist before. It led to darkness that felt deeper than any basement. Adrian appeared beside them again, though none of them had seen him enter. Please enjoy your meals, he said softly. The night will pass soon. His voice carried a faint echo as though spoken from a great distance. When he turned away, his reflection remained in the glass door half a second longer than his body. Mara sat with the group at a corner table. Nobody touched the food. They listened to the building breathe, the creaks of settling beams, the whisper of wind through the ventilation. And beneath it all, that steady hum again, now pulsing through the floor like a second heartbeat. What is that? Jenna asked. Elliot leaned down, pressing his ear to the tile. His face drained of color. It's coming from below us. Boilers? He shook his head. No. Voices. For a moment they all heard it. Faint murmuring underfoot, hundreds of overlapping whispers. Words too soft to understand. Then a woman screamed. It came from the lobby. They ran back through the corridor. The candles guttered as they passed, and the air turned colder. In the lobby, Mrs. Collins stood in front of the dead chandelier, her knitting bag spilled at her feet. She was staring up at the mezzanine balcony, hand trembling as she pointed. Someone up there, she gasped. I saw him just standing there. Elliot swung his flashlight toward the balcony. The beam reached the railing but showed nothing. Mrs. Collins began to cry softly. He looked like me. Her voice cracked on the last word. She turned toward Mara as if to explain, but before she could, the lights along the upper floors flickered one by one, stretching into the distance until they formed a path of dim yellow dots. The hum deepened. Somewhere in the walls, the elevator bell dinged once. Mara stepped backward until she felt the cool marble of a column against her spine. The others were murmuring, someone saying to call for help, another insisting they should stay put. Then faintly from the balcony came the sound of bare feet walking across carpet. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. The flashlight sputtered. Elliot smacked it, but the beam only wavered. When it steadied again, a figure stood at the top of the stairs. The shape was human, dressed in hotel livery, head tilted slightly. Its eyes caught the weak light, flat silver like mirrors. Adrian whispered, "Ah, the night porter." The figure smiled. And the lights went out completely. When the darkness lifted again, it wasn't the same lobby. The air smelled of dust and hot metal, as if something old had been scraped open. Candles burned where none had been lit, thick wax dripping over the marble. The chandelier hung lower, crooked, its chain groaning with every small movement of air. Mara blinked hard. The others were still there, huddled close, faces pale in the guttering light. But the reception desk was empty. Adrian was gone. A low click echoed from the mezzanine. Elliot aimed his light toward the staircase, but it reached only halfway, before fading into murk. "He was right there," he whispered. "You saw him?" Riley nodded, eyes darting toward the elevator doors. "Maybe he went up." Mrs. Collins shook her head slowly. "No one goes up when the lights go out. You go down." Noah joined them, clutching his sketchbook to his chest. The pages fluttered, though there was no wind. He said quietly, "The stairs aren't the same anymore." "What do you mean?" Mara asked. He held out the book. The newest drawing showed the staircase looping in on itself, an endless spiral lit by floating bulbs that looked like eyes. "I drew this before it happened," he said. "I thought it was just a dream." A faint ding came from the elevator again. The doors opened on their own. Inside was only darkness and the smell of damp iron. But on the floor of the car lay a wet footprint, bare, human, leading inward. No one spoke. Then Jenna whispered, "If that's him, he needs help." She stepped forward before Riley could stop her. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the doors began to close. Riley lunged and caught her arm. For an instant, both of them were trapped between. The flashlight beam struck metal. The reflection showed two faces, one his, one hers, but hers was screaming. The doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped with a roar that shook the entire lobby. Somewhere far below, they heard it hit. The sound went on too long. Panic broke the paralysis. Guests scattered, shouting for help, hammering on sealed doors. Elliot dragged Mara toward the stairwell. The handle turned easily now. Cold air spilled out. Concrete steps spiraled down into darkness. Emergency lights glowed at intervals, each one pulsing in rhythm with that deep underground hum. They descended carefully, their shadows stretching and shrinking with every pulse. "Basement should be 2 levels, Elliot said, breath fogging. "We hit service tunnels, we find the generator." Halfway down, the lights blinked out again, then back on. They were standing on a landing that shouldn't exist. The walls finished in ornate wallpaper, not concrete. A brass plaque read Floor 27, Mara stared. "We were going down." Elliot touched the wall. "Feels warm." Something moved at the far end of the corridor. Shapes crossing quickly, human-sized but blurred, like after images on an old film reel. Their footsteps echoed out of sync with their movement. One of them turned its head. Its face was featureless, pale and smooth as wax. Elliot grabbed Mara's arm. "Back up now," they ran. The stairs twisted tighter, the hum climbing in pitch until it became a whine inside their skulls. When they burst back through the door at the top, they were in a hallway neither recognized. Narrow, carpeted in crimson, lined with numbered doors that skipped in impossible sequences. 3320, Jamivive A341. Behind one door, a woman sobbed softly. "Hello?" Mara called. The sobbing stopped. Then the same voice answered from directly behind her. "Don't open anything." They found refuge in a linen closet that smelled of detergent and mold. Riley sat on the floor, shaking. "She's gone," he kept saying. "It was my fault." "She's gone." Noah drew furiously by candlelight, page after page. Mara glanced over his shoulder. He was sketching a map, lines and arrows that made no sense, levels stacked on levels. In the center, circled again and again, he had written one word: heart. "What's that?" Elliot asked. "The thing that's running," Noah murmured. "Every building has a heart." Ours started beating again. Before they could question him, the floor vibrated with a deep thud, like a giant pulse beneath concrete. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, doors slammed in unison. Mrs. Collins whispered a prayer under her breath. "It's waking." They followed the sound to the service corridor. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation. Warning signs hung at odd angles. Authorized personnel only, electrical hazard. But every arrow pointed in a different direction. The hum drew them toward a heavy steel door at the end. Someone had scrawled across it in black marker, "Keep it fed." Elliot hesitated. "Fed?" Mara turned the wheel handle. The metal groaned open. Warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of copper and ozone. Inside lay the generator room, or what used to be one. The machines were fused into the walls, their wires pulsing like veins. In the center stood a maintenance worker in coveralls, motionless, eyes closed. Cables threaded into his chest and throat, twitching gently with each pulse of light. Riley gagged. Jesus, the man's eyes opened. They were empty sockets glowing faintly red. His mouth moved dry and soundless before a single whisper scraped out. "Don't cut the power." Then every light in the room flared white. They stumbled back into the hall, blinded. When their vision cleared, the corridor behind them had changed again. The door they'd entered through was gone. In its place stood an elevator, doors open, waiting. On the wall beside it, the floor indicator read, "One no one wanted to move." But the air behind them was thickening, filling with a vibration that shook the bulbs overhead. One by one, the lights burst, showering glass. "Inside," Mara said. "Now." They piled into the elevator. The doors closed. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of breathing. Then the car began to descend. Elliot pressed the panel. No numbers, only a single word glowing faintly. "Lobby," Riley exhaled. "Fine, lobby, back where we started." But the descent didn't stop. The indicator flickered past L, then B1, B2, B3. The humming turned into a roar. "Stop it," Mara shouted. She hammered the emergency button. Sparks flew. The elevator shuddered to a halt and the doors slid open to reveal utter blackness. A low rhythmic pulse echoed from below, like a machine breathing. Elliot lifted the flashlight. The beam showed a massive circular chamber lined with mirrors, each reflecting the group from impossible angles. In the center stood Adrian, smiling. "Welcome back," he said. "The night is almost over." The elevator doors slid open on a pulse of heat. The light inside the circular chamber shimmered like water, reflections bending across the mirrored walls until the group appeared multiplied 100-fold. Every surface showed them from a slightly wrong angle. Faces longer, eyes too bright, mouths a second late to close. In the center stood Adrian, immaculate in his dark suit, as if the blackout had never touched him. The air smelled of ozone and metal dust. "Welcome back," he said. "You've come farther than most." No one answered. The mirrors made their breathing sound like a crowd. Riley kept the flashlight fixed on Adrian's chest, but the beam fractured, bouncing into a web of light that made it impossible to tell which image was real. Elliot swallowed. "Where are we?" "The same place you've always been," Adrian replied. "Just deeper. The Halcyon has many floors, but only one purpose." "What purpose?" Mara demanded. Adrian's reflection smiled first, a second before the man himself. "To remember." Behind him, one mirror rippled. Through the wavering glass, a shape drifted past. A woman in a hotel uniform, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. For an instant, Mara thought it was Jenna. Then the face dissolved into static like an old video losing signal. Riley stepped forward. "Where is she?" "Where's my wife?" Adrian tilted his head. "The Halcyon keeps what it's given. Every guest leaves something behind." He turned his hand upward and the floor responded. The tiles shifted, each square sliding back to reveal black glass beneath. Within that darkness, faint outlines floated. Suits, dresses, shapes of people suspended as if in water. The heartbeat that had followed them since the power failed now pulsed visibly through the floor. A dull glow with every thump. Mrs. Collins crossed herself. "God forgive us," she whispered. Adrian's smile widened. "There's no God here, ma'am. Only reflection." The mirrors brightened. In them, the group saw not themselves, but other guests. Dozens of versions flickering like candle flames. Mara's reflection held a phone that wasn't in her hand. Riley's double bled from the eyes. Elliot's image turned slowly to look at her, though he stood perfectly still beside her. Elliot's breath caught. "We have to go." "Go where?" Adrian asked gently. "Up, down? Every corridor leads here eventually. You can leave when the city remembers you." "What does that mean?" Mara snapped. "Remember us how?" He looked almost kind. "When someone outside still says your name." A sudden metallic crash cut through his words. One of the mirrors fractured from top to bottom. Beyond the crack was movement, shadows rushing forward. Adrian glanced back, expression tightening for the first time. "It's early," he murmured. The mirrors shattered outward. Shards spun through the air like knives, each reflecting the group in mid-panic. Riley pulled Mara behind him as a piece sliced across his arm. Blood hit the glass floor and hissed, vanishing in a puff of steam. "Back in the elevator," Elliot shouted. But the elevator was gone. Only a blank wall remained. Adrian stood motionless amid the chaos, his form flickering between human and reflection. "You shouldn't have come this far," he said. "The building feeds on attention. You've given it enough." Noah clutched his sketchbook to his chest. "You're not real." "Neither are you," Adrian answered. The hum became a roar. Every remaining mirror blazed with white light, showing Chicago outside, but not the Chicago they knew. The skyline was ruined, the river boiling, the Halcyon Tower burning like a candle. Mara staggered backward until her reflection aligned perfectly with the flames. The heat on her skin felt real. Riley grabbed her hand. "Don't look at it. Too late." The moment her gaze locked on the mirror, it pulled. The glass flexed like liquid. Riley held on, but his grip slid as her arm sank past the surface. For one heartbeat, he saw her face multiplied. Hundreds of Maras staring back, each mouthing the same silent word. "Help." He lunged and the mirror burst. When the light cleared, the wall was solid again. Mara was gone. Riley screamed her name until his voice broke. Elliot pulled him away before he smashed his fists bloody against the wall. Adrian lowered his head. "She's not dead," he said quietly. "She's remembered. Bring her back." Riley shouted. "I can't. The Halcyon decides who stays." The temperature plunged. Frost spread across the mirrors, sealing the cracks with veins of ice. In their surfaces, faint faces pressed from the other side, hundreds of them whispering in unison. Words formed inside Elliot's mind rather than his ears. "Stay. Stay until the lights return." Mrs. Collins began to pray again, louder this time, the rosary trembling in her hands. Noah sketched furiously, even as tears blurred his vision. "We're inside a loop," he muttered. "It's copying us. Every reflection adds another layer." Adrian's figure flickered once, twice. "You shouldn't fight it," he said. "Acceptance keeps the lights on." Elliot raised the flashlight like a weapon. "Then what happens if we turn them off?" He swung the beam toward the mirrored floor and smashed it down. The bulb exploded. For the briefest moment, total darkness returned. In that darkness, they all heard a sigh. Huge, relieved, almost human. Then the hum stopped. When the emergency lights blinked back to life, Adrian was gone. So were half the mirrors. Only 4 people remained: Elliot, Riley, Noah, and Mrs. Collins. Where Mara had stood lay her keycard, the number erased. No one spoke. The silence was worse than the noise. Then a faint ding echoed through the chamber. An elevator door materialized in the wall, open, waiting. Riley wiped his face with a shaking hand. "We go up," he said hoarsely. "We find her." Elliot nodded, but his eyes were hollow. He picked up the key card and slid it into his pocket. If the Halcyon remembers her, maybe she's somewhere above. They stepped inside. The panel glowed faintly, a single button, 34. The doors closed with a hiss like a drawn breath. As the car rose, the mirrors outside the glass walls showed the lobby, then the restaurant, then dozens of rooms passing by, but in each, People moved in reverse, walking backward through their own panic. Riley watched one reflection until he realized the man inside was him, dragging Jenna toward an elevator that never opened. The car slowed. The display read 34, but when the doors parted, the hallway beyond was not theirs. It looked newly built, fresh paint, clean carpets, untouched furniture. At the far end stood a woman facing the window. Her hair was dark, her posture familiar. "Mara?" Riley whispered. She turned. Her face was serene, eyes calm, mouth smiling faintly. "You're late," she said. "They've been waiting." The lights flickered once more and the doors slammed shut before anyone could move. The elevator began to rise again, faster this time, the numbers spinning past impossible floors. 40, 60, 80, until the display blanked. Elliot gripped the rail. "It's not taking us up," he said. "It's taking us out." The hum returned, softer now, almost tender. From somewhere above, Adrian's voice drifted down through the speaker grill. "The night is ending. Please remain in your rooms." The elevator stopped with a violent jolt. The lights failed. When they flickered on again, only Elliot stood inside. The others were gone. His reflection in the polished door smiled back at him, a half-second late, whispering words he couldn't hear. Elliot stood alone in the humming silence of the elevator, his reflection watching him with delayed precision, like the memory of someone he used to be. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't a floor, it was a horizon. Chicago stretched out below, but dim and colorless, the skyline bleeding into a pale storm. The air smelled of dust and burnt ozone. As he stepped forward, the elevator vanished behind him, leaving only the sound of electricity crawling through the air like whispers and static. The ground beneath his shoes was tiled marble, the same pattern as the hotel lobby, but cracked, weathered, half buried in ash. The city was gone. Only the Halcyon remained, its black windows rising from the ruin, every pane reflecting faces he once knew. He walked toward the entrance, the doors opening without a sound, and inside, the lobby gleamed as if newly built. Candles burned. Music played faintly from an old radio. Behind the counter stood Adrian, smiling as though nothing had happened. "Checking out?" he asked politely, sliding a familiar key card across the desk. Mara's, the number now restored. Elliot's hand trembled as he picked it up, staring at the small gold digits engraved into the metal. "Where is she?" he whispered, but Adrian's expression didn't change. "She's already waiting upstairs." Against all reason, Elliot turned toward the grand staircase, each step echoing like footsteps on hollow ground. As he climbed, the hum grew softer, replaced by a heartbeat that might have been his own. The higher he went, the more the walls shimmered until they became mirrors reflecting endless versions of himself. Some older, some younger, some burned or bleeding, all walking in perfect rhythm. He reached the top and found a hallway that stretched into shadow. At its end, an open door spilled warm yellow light onto the carpet. He stepped through, calling Mara's name, and the room answered in her voice. "I told you the night would pass." She stood by the window, her eyes impossibly calm, the city lights flickering behind her like dying fireflies. For a moment, he felt peace. Then he saw his own reflection in the glass, standing beside her, smiling, though he hadn't moved. "You stayed," she said softly, touching his face. "Now the Halcyon will too." He tried to speak, but the air thickened, and the world began to fold inward, mirrors closing like eyelids until all that remained was the heartbeat of the building, steady and eternal. When morning came, Chicago awoke to headlines of a massive power surge that crippled half the city. Fire crews investigating the blackout found the Halcyon Grand completely empty, tables set, lights on, doors unlocked, but no staff, no guests, no trace of life. Only a single object sat on the reception desk, a brass key card engraved with one word beneath the number, 27, remembered.